He used to watch other people's lives the way you watch a lottery draw, distant, awestruck, convinced the winners had been chosen before they were even born. In the soft light of his kitchen, fingers wrapped around a lukewarm coffee, he flips through bank statements and old promises, and the word luck rises like steam. Some people just get it, he tells his sister on the phone, voice steady but small. They're born into it, or they stumble into it. Me? I try, I fail, then I try again. The kitchen clock ticks like a metronome for habits that have long outlived their usefulness. The city outside moves like a film in fast-forward, joggers, subways, headlines about someone who made millions overnight. Inside, his apartment has the gentle clutter of a life lived responsibly, framed photos of birthdays, a half-read book on investing, a plant that survived one too many busier months. There's a particular kind of loneliness in watching possibility from a distance. It's not the absence of desire, it's the grinding certainty that desire rarely turns into steady yield. I meet him at that table, not as an intruder but as an old friend with a different lens. I ask him to describe luck, and he laughs, almost embarrassed. Luck is random, he says. You can't plan for randomness. I listen, and then I offer another word, frequency. It sounds strange at first, a science term for feelings, an engineer's word applied to money, but when I suggest that wealth might be less a bolt from the blue and more a steady signal you learn to emit, his shoulders shift. Doubt flickers, then curiosity. This is the soft but decisive call, not to chase a thunderclap, but to tune a station. The choice isn't dramatic at first, a morning ritual altered, a posture corrected, a few thoughts renamed, but beneath those small adjustments lies a different kind of courage. The question that now sits between us is simple and honest: do you believe wealth is luck, or could it be frequency? If that question resonates, give this moment a quiet like, and stay with me, subscribe to follow the steps that will turn curiosity into practice. Next, we linger on the first refusal, the old voice that resists change, and watch how the smallest habit begins to rewrite a life. He sat at the kitchen table long after dinner plates had been cleared, a single lamp warming a stack of unopened envelopes. Outside, the city had softened to a hush. Inside, his thoughts hustled like commuters, each one louder than the last. The guide watched him for a moment, then sank into the chair across, palms open as if offering something that carried both comfort and demand. You think wealth is a bolt of luck, the guide said quietly. But what if it's a steady radio frequency you learn to tune into? Scene by scene, the guide taught him simple rituals that looked almost mundane, a 3-minute morning breath that widened his posture, a brief inventory of daily decisions where each small yes or the no was logged like currency, and a nightly gratitude list not of things he wanted but of actions he had taken that day. At first the practices felt inconsequential. He measured them with impatience, no sudden fortune, no overnight miracle. The old scripts returned, doubt humming, the familiar pull of scarcity thinking that urged him to check balances at midnight, to bargain with hope. One rainy afternoon, frustrated, he said aloud, "What if this is all just wishful thinking?" The guide smiled, not dismissive but exact. Frequency isn't wishful thinking, it's consistent tuning. A radio only plays music when it's on the right station. You keep changing channels and you'll never hear the song. She demonstrated by guiding him through a posture shift, shoulders down, chest open, eyes steady. He felt, surprisingly, a small unclenching in his chest. It wasn't money, but it was unwiring a habit. The body could lead the mind toward a different possibility. Small echoes of change began to arrive. A long-postponed conversation at work opened a practical collaboration. A neighbor mentioned a referral, a bank call turned more curious than critical. These were not fireworks, but threads, gentle, persistent shifts in the pattern of his days. And with each thread, people responded differently to him, more attentiveness, less apology in his tone, more options appearing where previously there had been none. He learned to notice the difference between feeling lucky and feeling aligned. The former was reactive and fleeting, the latter intentional and steady. But the habit of old doubt lurked, and the next challenge would test whether those threads could weave into something lasting. Do you want to learn the daily rhythms that make prosperity repeatable? If this resonates, like what you hear and subscribe quietly, there's more to come. He sits at the kitchen table long after the dishes are done, a single lamp casting a warm island of light over spreadsheets and a cup gone cold. Outside, the city hums like a distant radio, indifferent and constant. He rubs his temples and remembers his father's offhand words, "Some men are born under lucky stars." That memory is a weathered stone in his chest, heavy, familiar, explaining everything he has feared to change. The guide leans against the doorway, calm as the lamp, and says, "Luck is a story. Frequency is a practice. There's no sermon, only a patient invitation." They begin small, like tuning an old instrument. "Stand," the guide says. He shifts his feet, surprised by how awkward dignity feels after years of hunching over bills and to-do lists. The guide gently directs his breath, his posture, his inner language, the phrases he uses when the phone rings, when an invoice is late, when a client cancels. "Notice without judging," the guide murmurs. "You don't wrestle with the thought. You turn the dial." He laughs at himself when scarcity sneaks in, at the familiar scripts that blame the world. The laugh is brittle but honest, it cracks something open. They walk the city the next morning, past a bakery that smells of butter and possibility, past a building with a brass nameplate and a lobby that seems to say, "You belong." The guide points out people who carry a different weight, open shoulders, steady voice, small investments in themselves that add up to large invitations. "These are not accidents," the guide says. "They are patterns, repeated choices that tune a field." He asks for one weekly practice, a 5-minute alignment, a small ledger of gratitude, a posture held for a full minute before answering money matters. The first week is messy. Old reflexes, panic, bargaining, hiding, drag him back to the familiar shore. But there are tiny currents, too. A new email arrives, a neighbor returns a favor, his tone during a negotiation softens and unexpected clarity appears. If this resonates, a quiet like helps this message find others. Do you believe wealth is luck or frequency? He wants to believe, and the next moment will demand he prove it, not with luck, but with steady repetition. The test is coming, and he cannot pretend to be surprised. He wakes before dawn, the apartment half-light soft against the stack of unpaid envelopes. The guide is already at the table, a steaming cup beside a small leather notebook. "Wealth isn't lightning," she says, watching him fold his hands around the cold ceramic. "It's a steady current you tune into." He wants to argue, he almost does, but there's something in the calm of her voice that stops him. They don't talk theory long. She starts with the body, a modest ritual of posture and breath. "Sit tall," she instructs, feet grounded, chest open. "Breathe in for 4, hold, release. Your nervous system broadcasts the first frequency," she says. He feels it, a small loosening behind his ribs, a clarity that wasn't there over the kitchen table with bills. They build from physical to linguistic shifts. "Speak to your ledger like a living thing," she advises. He laughs, incredulous, and she smiles. "Say the numbers aloud in present tense. Name one tiny action you'll take today toward income. Then note one small win before bed." He tries, "I receive income with ease." The sentence feels foreign, almost foolish. But he writes it down, the pen scratching like a small promise. Outside, a tram brakes, inside, a new repetition begins. She teaches him to listen for the old voice, scarcity dressed as realism, and to greet it without surrender. When it says, "Your lucky friends get opportunities, not you," he replies out loud, "Maybe they did, but I create my own openings." They practice decisions, to polite refusal to a draining favor, a yes to a proposal that feels aligned, the removal of one cluttered subscription that cost more than it gave. Each tiny choice recalibrates his frequency. The guide asks him to notice how his posture changes when he says yes to himself. He notices how a different kind of person begins to show up in his inbox, practical invitations, clear proposals, not miracles but steady offers. There is still fear, or a tightness that flares when the phone is silent. She hands him the leather notebook. "Record the wins," she says. "Not to prove anything to the world, but to prove to yourself your current is real." He opens the book that night, lists small gains, and feels a quiet accumulation in his chest like coin stacking. Which small practice will you begin today to tune your frequency? If you want to keep walking this path with simple, repeatable steps, subscribe for the next session. As the weekly rituals settle into his days, a single test approaches, a moment that will ask whether frequency has become his fate. He woke before dawn, not because fortune had finally arrived, but because the guide had taught him a different kind of devotion. Frequency requires tending. The kitchen light was low, the city outside still soft, and he moved through a quiet ritual as if learning to tune a long-neglected instrument. He placed his palms on the table, felt the grain under his fingers, and breathed slowly. Start with posture, the guide had said the first morning, and now he straightened, shoulders back, chest open, like someone who expects easier doors to swing wide. The change wasn't dramatic at first. It was the subtle tightening of choices, saying no to energy-draining commitments, rerouting conversations away from scarcity, answering emails with clarity instead of reaction. He wrote 3 small intentions each day, clear, specific, achievable, and read them aloud with steady breath. Money follows consistent attention, the guide murmured in one of their walks through the park, leaves drifting like small affirmations. It tracks what you treat as true. Doubt arrived in familiar guises. An old ledger of bills, a memory of an impulsive investment gone wrong, a friend's scoff, each tried to yank him into the old frequency. He felt the pull of habit in his chest, comfort disguised as caution. One evening, alone at the window, he let himself confess it aloud. "Maybe I'm not built for this," he whispered. The guide's reply, remembered, was neither harsh nor soft. Frequency outlasts talent. You can learn the rhythm. So he rehearsed rhythm. He practiced micro-decisions, declining a dinner that would leave him exhausted, choosing a research call instead of idle scrolling, offering a small, unexpected kindness that shifted a conversation toward possibility. He changed the soundscape of his mornings, a short period of gratitude, a 2-minute visualization of doors opening, a ledger entry of one action taken toward income. Each tiny repetition nudged his posture, tightened his attention, aligned him with people who operated at a similar pitch of possibility. A week later a phone call came, a quiet opportunity, not a lottery ticket but a doorway that required courage to open. He felt the old fear, then paused, breathed, and answered from the steady place he had been building. The result wasn't guaranteed, but his presence had shifted the way the other person listened. Does this feel familiar? If a small habit could change your financial atmosphere, which one would you choose to begin today? If you want the next step, how to sustain momentum when outcomes lag, stick with me. There is a decisive moment ahead that tests everything he's learned. He stood by the kitchen window while the city woke, coffee cooling in his hands, the old story whispering in his ear. Some people simply get lucky. The guide moved closer without hurry, voice low and steady. Luck is a story people tell about outcomes. Frequency is what creates them. Let me show you the habits that hold it. He listened, skeptical, then curious, the exact posture of someone ready to try. They began simply. 10 deep breaths each morning, not to chase calm but to tune the body to a steady rhythm. The guide taught him to stand tall for 30 seconds before any important call, to feel a light steadiness behind the sternum as if wealth had a posture. Decisions made from that place stick, the guide said. Face the day from inside that frequency, and your choices start to match it. He practiced the anchor, breath, posture, one-word intention, abundance. It sounded small. It felt large. Old habits tugged back. At the sight of a bill or a tempting ad, the familiar panic flared. The guide didn't denounce fear, he named it and gave it a seat at the table. Acknowledge it, then return to your signal, he advised. The hero learned to pause for 60 seconds before spending, before saying yes, before reacting. That pause, repeated daily, rewired impulse into intention. They rehearsed conversations, role-played a negotiation at a worn wooden table with late afternoon light slanting in. He practiced speaking from frequency instead of need, his voice changed, steadier, less hurried. When he called a potential client, the exchange felt different, curiosity replaced pleading, and the client leaned in. Opportunities arrived not like lightning but like a tide nudging in, small contracts, a referral, a surprised bank notification with a steady drip of new income. Each was proof that consistency shaped circumstance. The guide reminded him that frequency is social too. He adjusted who he spent time with, invited people who matched his new rhythm, and found conversations began to open doors instead of closing them. Doubt still returned, a text from an old friend, an unexpected expense, and he used the anchor to come back. It wasn't dramatic. It was daily, patient, stubborn. Are you ready to hold that steady signal through a real, high-stakes choice? If you want to keep walking this path, subscribe and join me, and next, we'll step into a pivotal decision that tests everything you've started to build. He woke before dawn, not because an alarm dragged him out of bed, but because a small insistence inside him had shifted, the kind that feels like air moving into a room that's been closed for too long. In the kitchen, light poured across the counter. He set a cup of tea down, opened a notebook and wrote 3 precise things he wanted to feel today: clarity, generosity, and enough. The guide's voice was soft in his memory. We begin by tuning the instrument, the music follows. The practices were simple but disciplined. 10 deep breaths, standing tall as if the spine were a mast, a minute of focus, gratitude, naming resources already present, a tiny decision audit. What will I say yes to, and what do I refuse today? He learned to treat posture as permission, shoulders back, voice steady, eye contact steady. It changed how people heard him. When he quoted a price that would have once felt greedy, it landed like reason. A client paused, then nodded. "That works," she said. The sound of that agreement was unfamiliar and intoxicating. Old habits returned as ghosts, the small, urgent voice that whispered, "Be careful or don't risk." He welcomed the doubt, named it, then kept going. On a city street, a neighbor waved and asked what had changed. He shrugged and answered honestly, "I stopped waiting for luck." The neighbor laughed, but there was curiosity in the laugh. Curiosity draws opportunity as surely as a magnet draws iron filings. These were not grand rituals but repeatable acts that created a steady frequency, consistent morning alignment, 3 decisive no's per week to low-value offers, a weekly pause to track choices against values. Over time, the rhythm did something deeper than produce a single windfall. It rewired his taste. He began to choose partnerships that matched his frequency, to show up as someone who expected flow. Opportunities stopped arriving as sudden strokes of fortune and instead showed up as predictable knocks on a door he had kept open. One evening, as the sun lowered the city to gold, he turned to me and said, quietly, "It feels less like luck and more like a language I'm learning." If you felt that first clear note, if you want the map for the next daily rhythms that hold this state steady, stay with me, and if this landed, give it a small sign below and subscribe so the next step arrives. The room smelled of coffee and rain. Soft morning light cut across the wooden table where he sat with a notebook still mostly blank. The guide poured a second cup and spoke without hurry. "Wealth is a steady signal," she said, tapping the table like a metronome. "Not a single strike of lightning, but a rhythm you keep." He frowned. "How do you make a rhythm out of money?" She smiled. "You start small, and you repeat." She taught him 3 simple alignments: the body, the mind, and the choice. First, the body, stand for 2 minutes each morning with feet grounded, shoulders open, breath slow. Posture is a frequency amplifier, she explained, leaning back so the light made the lines of her face calm and sure. He tried it, felt his chest unclench, the old tension in his jaw loosen. The breath slowed the edge of his doubt like ocean smoothing stones. Second, the mind, a ledger not of bills but of wins. Write 3 small returns every evening: 1 task completed, 1 value you offered, 1 person you helped. Celebrate the flow you already have. He wrote "fixed the leak" and called an old client and felt his inner narrator, the one that said "not enough," soften. The third was choice, a tiny, repeatable decision that honors abundance. Pay yourself first, set a price with calm, say no to small drains. When he raised his rate that week, his hands shook. When the client accepted without flinching, his chest opened wider. They practiced language together. She coached him to speak as if resources were present: "I choose this, not I hope for that." He practiced at the cafe, ordering something he previously skipped. The barista's smile shifted, another patron listened, then asked about his work. Opportunities slid into spaces he had cleared by simple acts of consistency. There were setbacks, an old friend mocked the change, a bill caught him off guard, and each time she reminded him, consistency beats intensity. Tune again. His life began to reorder, different people, different offers, a steadier inbox. He felt less like someone waiting for luck and more like someone holding a steady signal. Do you want to learn the daily rhythms that keep prosperity steady? If you're ready to walk the next steps with him, stay with us, subscribe to keep receiving the practices that turn frequency into lasting wealth. Tomorrow the real test arrives, a choice that will reveal whether his new frequency can hold under pressure. He woke before dawn, the city still half closed, and the coach's voice, calm as a lighthouse, slipped into his thoughts. Wealth listens to frequency, not fate. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone warm, and for the first time in years he opened a small notebook instead of his email. The guide had asked him to name 3 small motions that would become his frequency anchors: posture, attention, and decision. He placed his hand flat on the page and breathed like it was part of a ritual, each inhalation a tuning fork bringing his body and intention into alignment. Stand like someone who expects their house to be full of light, the guide had said days before, and now he rose, shoulders back, chin level, feeling how stance carried a steady current through his spine. He practiced a 2-minute breath that translated anxiety into focus, then wrote one non-negotiable decision for the day, a phone call to a client, a small investment of time toward a plan he'd shelved. The actions were tiny, almost trivial, but the repetition stitched a new muscle into his life. In the supermarket checkout line, in the mirror before bed, these movements hummed the same tune: I am set to receive. Conversations changed too. When an old friend asked if his new routine was just luck, he smiled, remembering the guide's patient correction. Luck is a snapshot, he said, frequency is the album. The friend laughed, but the words landed. People around him began to mirror that steadiness. Colleagues offered consistent contracts, a neighbor mentioned a team opening, an unexpected call led to a collaboration that fit like a glove. It wasn't random windfalls, it was a steady tide that pulled small boats toward shore. At night he reviewed a ledger of tiny wins, a saved hour, a new connection, a committed payment plan. The numbers were modest, but the feeling was compound. The mind that had once equated wealth with lightning now recognized the slow, relentless electricity of habit. He realized abundance didn't demand dramatic risk, it required daily fidelity to a frequency he could sustain. If this rhythm sounds like something you want to try, press like and tell me which small motion will become your anchor. Tomorrow, we'll watch how that anchor shifts relationships and opens doors you didn't expect. He returns to the kitchen where it all began, light slicing through the blinds like an answered question. The same old coffee mug sits on the counter, but something in him sits differently. He moves with a quiet deliberation now, posture aligned, shoulders relaxed, chest open, a small, physical signal that his inner barometer has shifted. The guide's voice arrives in memory and in the soft clink of a spoon. Wealth isn't thunderbolts. It's a frequency you choose and practice. He smiles, not because everything is solved, but because he knows the next steps. In the days that follow he builds rhythms that feel almost sacred, 10 minutes each morning of attuned breath and clear intention, a ledger that tracks choices instead of just numbers, brief posture checks before every meeting, and a weekly ritual of gratitude that catalogs opportunities rather than wishing for miracles. Each repetition is a tiny tuning fork, aligning his thoughts, posture, and decisions until his presence hums at a steady, inviting pitch. People notice. Doors open in quieter, more reliable ways, a steady client, a conversation that becomes a partnership, a neighbor who becomes an advocate. Those are not luck, those are resonance. There are tests. Old fears whisper at 3 in the morning, and an unexpected bill arrives like a nostalgic ghost. He answers differently now, with curiosity, not condemnation. He asks not why me, but what frequency am I offering? That question becomes his tool. When doubt surfaces, he leans into the practice, breath, stance, a small recalibration of intention. The result is not instant fortune, but an unfolding corridor where choices line up with possibility. He begins to feel the economy around him as a field he can tune, not a lottery he must endure. On the final evening he sits at his window, looking at the city lights, each one a small life humming its own frequency. He reaches for the guide's hand in memory and hears, softly, "Teach what steadies you." He knows now that the true elixir he brings back to life is consistency, the daily, repeatable acts that keep prosperity stable. So tell me, are you ready to stop waiting for lightning and start tending your frequency? If this felt like the right next step, stay here for the next practice. Subscribe and we'll build the daily rhythms together.